Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Karen Doyle and I'm part of the CTAM Europe team. I'm happy to welcome you to this month's webinar for members. We are finalising the rest of the 2020 programme, so please do keep checking online for the upcoming month's topics. We are also having an event in London in April and more details will follow in a newsletter next week. Today we are pleased to have Ampere Analysis Consumer Research Lead Minal Modha and Alexios Dimitropoulos, Senior Analyst, presenting the webinar. They'll be discussing the feasibility of Sport OTT and diving into what the Sport OTT audiences are, how they differ from pay TV and free TV audiences, and how the services stack up. Before we start the webinar, I'd just like to mention that all participants will be muted throughout. If you have any questions, you can use the button on your screen to submit them. These will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you have any further questions after the webinar, you can always email info@ctameurope.com. I will hand you over to Minal and Alexios, but before they start the presentation, we just wanted to take the opportunity to show a short 90-second video about the CTAM Europe Executive Management Programme, which we hold annually at INSEAD. Registration is open and the class is already half full. So please do get in touch with any questions or if you wish to register. So sit back and enjoy, and I will now hand you over to Minal and Alexios. Thank you.
CTAM Europe Executive Management Programme at INSEAD. An intensive, comprehensive learning and development experience developed for the connectivity and entertainment industry. A program to help industry leaders stay one step ahead of the changes in our industry. At the inception of the 5-day program, we chose to partner with INSEAD, the business school for the world, whose global MBA program has been ranked as the #1 program in the world for 2 consecutive years. Senior executives at the top of the organizations have the time to reflect and think about the seeds and trends of change during the 5-day program. The program has helped over 150 senior industry leaders become better leaders throughout the past years. The classes are generally around 20 to 30 participants, and therefore chances for discussions throughout the week are extensive. In addition, there are some fabulous organized networking and social events. New contacts are made and nourished throughout the week and beyond. We hope to welcome you or your organization's leaders onto our next program.
Hi all, our presentation is going to be split into 2 sections. I'm going to be taking you through the growth of Sport OTT and where it sits in the wider broadcast landscape, and then we're going to come on to the direct-to-consumer opportunity and what their economics are, and at that point I'll hand over to my colleague Alexios. So we all know about the fragmentation of media as consumers are given more and more opportunity to curate their own viewing. We've heard about an increase in cord cutting and until recently the dwindling sport audiences in the US. So the assumption would be that sport isn't in a very good position. Well, this just isn't true. Now, although there are some isolated incidences, generally sport remains one of the few appointments to view. Now, we can see this from the record viewing figures across a number of big competitions and leagues last year. For example, the ICC Cricket World Cup saw cumulative audiences increase by 38%, and the FIFA Women's World Cup also saw similar growth from the previous tournament. Now, this has produced an increasingly competitive media landscape as rights buyers work harder to retain the premium rights. In the last few years, the traditional TV broadcasters are no longer just competing amongst themselves, but also with the emerging new OTT platforms too. As this chart shows, in Western Europe and Asia Pacific, the OTT players are already into double figures. But what does Sport OTT actually mean? Well, we've categorized them into 4 buckets. Pure OTT platforms are ones whose core business is online only, such as DAZN. OTT and TV channels are platforms with a presence on both, such as 11 Sports. OTT via a broadcaster are where the rights are bought by a broadcaster, but then seeded out through an OTT platform, such as Sky in the UK or Hotstar in India. Finally, you can access Sport OTT free from a provider. So this could be from a TV Everywhere service, from rights buyers such as Telstra in Australia, or free as from your telco as part of your subscription. Now, direct-to-consumer represents the fifth bucket, but I won't be touching on that in this section as we'll be coming onto that later on. Now, for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to be focusing on the pure OTT platforms. Now, on average, 6% of internet users from our consumer survey say that they have a subscription to a pure sport OTT platform as of Q3 2019, and the pace of that growth has been relatively steady. North America is marginally above average for subscribers and saw a relatively high increase in 2018. Western Europe, on the other hand, is tracking on par or slightly below the global average. But as players such as Eurosport sign more deals with aggregators like Amazon, and DAZN continues to expand with deals such as the one in Germany for the Champions League rights, we would expect this number to rise. But who are the sport OTT audiences and how do they differ from pay TV ones? Well, they tend to skew younger, potentially drawn to the accessibility of the content. Now, this presents an opportunity to re-engage this younger demographic who we know from our research are under-indexing in a number of markets in their interest in sport. Sport OTT platforms take this one step further by also providing more access to families than pay TV is able to do so. Research shows that sport fandom is cemented at a young age, usually between about 8 or 10 years old. So the ability to get sport content in front of younger audiences is so important for the future of our industry. Sport audiences are more than twice as likely to have premium channels in their household than average. This highlights not only just their disposable income, but also their propensity to spend it to access content that they want. And finally, nearly half of sport OTT audiences don't mind seeing advertising when watching TV. So not only are these audiences attractive from an advertiser's point of view by both skewing young and willing to spend the money, but their attitudes to advertising opens the door to auxiliary funding for sport OTT platforms. Now, we're going to dig into the economics of these services shortly, and that's where we'll see the importance of this. Now, in theory, these audiences provide the best of both worlds. They already pay for a subscription, and they have a more relaxed attitude to advertising, which could present two opportunities to monetize them. So we know that this is an attractive audience, but how many of them have actually been captured? Well, from Ampere's estimations, we know that sport OTT audiences only makes up 2% of total sport audiences who are willing to pay to access sport content. That means that there's over 500 million fans still left to convert. But what does all of this mean for rights holders? Well, in the short term, sport OTT platforms won't be replacing traditional TV as the main broadcaster, but increasingly they will have an important role to play in reaching those younger audiences. Additionally, the presence of children in the household gives rights holders the opportunity to grow those future fan bases. And finally, there may be implications on how rights are carved out. In mobile-first markets such as China and India, mobile-only rights may increasingly become more attractive, and rights holders will have to react to this. So we've looked at the growth of sport OTT platforms, what their audiences look like and how they compare against pay TV, and then the implications for the rights holders. But do the economics of them actually stack up? Now, when we look at sports spend as a whole, North America is driving this with high-value deals in the US for the NBA, the NFL, and the MLB. And there are also significant deals for the likes of WWE, UFC, etc. Within Europe, football dominates. The domestic leagues perform particularly well in their own market. And then on top of that, you have competitions such as the UEFA Champions League, which command large fees in their own right. Now, online players such as DAZN, 11 Sports, they've been increasing their live sport portfolios. However, by the end of 2018, they still only accounted for a small percentage of total sports spend, and that's less than 2%, and that is of the pure OTT sport players. Now, we are expecting this number to rise and continue over the next few years and reach about 5% of total sports spend by 2021. Now, this number is heavily influenced by DAZN, and they're often referred to as the Netflix of sport. So is this a fair comparison? Well, let's have a look at the similarities first. Both Netflix and DAZN have got large upfront licensing and production investments expected in the next few years. They're both available in multiple markets with localized content and interfaces. And they both have lower consumer pricing than many premium channel competitors in each of the markets that they're present in. Now, if we look at the differences, the first main one is that sport relies on live broadcasting, and with that comes higher related infrastructure costs due to the surges that you get in streaming requests. Secondly, Netflix has ownership of all of the original content it produces, and consumers can repeatedly go back to this without any time limit on it. Whereas for DAZN, there are time restraints on how long they have access to their rights for, and then they're back into a bidding war for the next cycle. Finally, and potentially the biggest one, is the geographic licensing of content. Now, in most cases, sports rights are sold separately in each market, and especially for the high-value domestic leagues. DAZN is not yet in a position to negotiate global or regional rights for any sporting event. By contrast, Netflix has been increasingly successful at acquiring rights across a wide geographic area, and its original content strategy also helps to fuel global rights access for its consumers. What all of this means is that for each new market DAZN launches in, there are more upfront costs in sport and production investments. So when we take all of this into consideration, it isn't really fair to call DAZN the Netflix of sport, as while their models have got some similarities, the differences are much greater. Now, in order to look at the economics of Sport OTT, we've taken a look at DAZN in Italy. Now, if we look at DAZN's portfolio, our research shows that over a third of Italian internet users have got an interest in it. Now, when we funnel this down into those who are willing to pay, we can see that 27% are willing to pay for any part of that portfolio. However, this is driven primarily by Serie A, and not only does DAZN have a relatively small package, but the majority of those who are willing to pay for this already do so via Sky Italia. However, let's stick with this hypothetical scenario for now, and let's see how that large addressable audience can translate into some potential subscriber numbers. So of the circa 17 million internet households in Italy, about 6.9 million people are willing to pay for them. Of that, 65% currently have an SVOD service in the household and therefore represents the addressable audience. Now this equates to 4.5 million potential subscribers. If DAZN was able to convert just half of these, it would give them 2.2 million subscribers in Italy. So we've had a look at the hypothetical. Now let's have a look to see what's actually happening in the market with DAZN. So the blue bar represents the number of subscribers that they have. The orange line is the revenue, and then the black line are the rights fees. So we forecast DAZN to reach 1.42 million subscribers by the end of last year. And of the 4.5 million potential audience pool, we estimate DAZN will reach about 40% of them by the end of 2020. Now, when we're looking at the revenues, which is the orange line, we forecast this to grow steadily over the next few years and hit over $200 million by the end of 2023. Just to bear in mind that this is purely the revenue they would get from the OTT subscriptions and not from any of the carriage deals. Now, although their Serie A rights fee finishes this year in 2020, for this scenario, we have assumed a modest inflation and the continuation of a similar rights fee. And so from that, what you can see is there is a substantial gap between the rights costs and the revenue. Now, this doesn't even take into account operating costs, which would increase this gap even further. Now, it's at this point that potential auxiliary funding from streams such as advertising could begin to play a part. The gap between the two also highlights the importance of revenue from things like the Sky Italia deal and shows that even for pure OTT players, TV may begin to have a bigger role. Now, when we broaden out the picture to three of DAZN's core markets, so Germany, Italy, and Japan, we can see that there's a similar picture. From 2018 to 2019, they grew their subscriber base, their revenues grew at a healthy pace. However, that rights fee also grew substantially. Now, we estimate that based on that $600 million rights fee across those 3 markets, if DAZN wants to break even, it would take 5.6 million subscribers. Now, we saw from the previous slide that they're currently at 4.3 million subscribers across these 3 markets, and that they grew about 1.2 million from 2018. So whilst it's not completely unfeasible, it's still a pretty big undertaking. So we've seen the landscape in which sport OTT platforms are operating, and while there is opportunity, there are also a lot of challenges, whether this is infrastructure or the increasing costs of geographic licensing. But how do the economics stack up for rights holders to go direct to consumer with their properties? I'm going to pass over to my colleague Alexios to take you through this.
Thank you, Minal. So I will talk more about the direct-to-consumer services, a bit about their economics and where we can see and how we can see the opportunity for them. Just for the purposes of this presentation, I will start with quickly representing what we mean with direct-to-consumer services in the sports world. So what we want is to go from the live competition and distribute the feed and engage the fans. In the traditional model, we have the right holder, the competition, selling the rights to a pay TV, free-to-air or OTT provider. They will take care of the production, distribute the feed, and engage the fans through their own platform. With the direct-to-consumer model, we have the competition keeping the rights for themselves. They will have to take care of the production and distribute the live feed through their own branded platform to engage the fans. Now, up to now, we've seen many different competitions launching their own direct-to-consumer services. And we've seen for many years now well-known players like the NBA and NFL having their own services, but also new entrants like the FA Player or the UEFA TV in Europe. But if we look around this list, which is a non-exhaustive list, and its main examples that we found across the world, we've seen a couple of themes and similarities within them. So most of them, they operate in out-of-market basis, meaning that in their own domestic market, they will sell the rights to a pay TV or an OTT or free-to-air provider. And on out-of-market basis, they will have their own direct-to-consumer service for the live feed. But also, most of them are considered as second-tier, more niche sports, and not first-tier like the NBA and the NFL, which do have their services, but mostly operate in out-of-market basis. And services like them come with a lot of complementary and ancillary content. So if most of the direct-to-consumer services are about second-tier and niche sports, what about the tier 1 sports? Could they go direct-to-consumer in their own domestic market? For that, we will use the example of the 4 main football leagues in Europe, and we'll first see what's at stake. The TV rights they currently have are worth more than 1 billion euros per season, or in the case of Premier League, around 1.5 billion pounds. And these are the revenues that the leagues will have to cover if they go full direct-to-consumer in their own domestic market. If we see who usually buys these rights, there are big players, regional players, and big telcos like Sky and Telefonica, and the smaller packages could go either to pay TV and telcos like BT, MediaPro, Orange, free-to-air players like ZDF in Germany, or as Minal showed you, recent entrants like DAZN and Amazon in the OTT space. Now, what players like Sky and big players like Telefonica can do is to actually buy the addressable audience. And what we mean by that is how these leagues dominate the market in their own country. So in UK and Germany, 18% of the total respondents we asked are willing to pay for Premier League and Bundesliga respectively, and only half for Champions League, which is the second most popular sport. In Spain and Italy, they're a bit more enthusiastic with the football, and it's almost a quarter that are willing to pay to watch their own domestic league. And with operators like Sky who operate in 3 different markets of this, what that translates to it's more than 45%, and in the case of Italy, close to 60% of the total pay TV subscriber base are taking sports packages. And that's what we mean, that they buy the addressable audience. That's how these rights translate to their own business. So if we take the hypothetical and all of these leagues launch their own direct-to-consumer service in their own domestic market, what kind of subscriber base would they need to cover these big TV right values? In general, we've seen usually the price of OTT services being around 10 euros or 10 pounds. With that price point, Premier League would need 15.5 million subscribers to cover the rights. And in the case of Bundesliga, La Liga, and Serie A, they will need more than 10 million subscribers. And these are obviously very high numbers. But even if we take a much higher price point, like 25 euros or 25 pounds, still the Premier League will need more than 6 million, and the other three leagues will need more than 4 million subscribers. Now, to put a bit more context around it, we'll take the example of the UK with Premier League, and we see that with the first price point, 15.5 million equal the total UK pay TV subscriber base. They're more than 3 times what Sky Sports subscribers are right now, and more than 2 times the total households willing to pay to watch the Premier League. So it paints a quite unfeasible picture. With the second price point, 6 million subscribers are still over what Sky Sports subscribers are. They're over 70% of the total households willing to pay to watch the Premier League. And from our own research, we find out that usually the competitions manage to capture around 50% of their willingness to pay households on their domestic market. And it's also a quarter of the fixed line broadband market. So still, it looks a bit more feasible, but it's a high risk to launch right now and achieve these high numbers of subscribers. So how can we find the opportunity? If it's too much risk for players like Premier League and Bundesliga, can we see the opportunity somewhere else? We will take the example of the UK to exhibit how we can find this opportunity. And this graph shows you the percentage of respondents that enjoy watching the different competitions in the UK, excluding the Premier League. And that will indicate the overall popularity of the sport and the potential viewership. Now, in this graph, if we take into account the percentage of each fan base for the different competitions that are willing to pay to watch a competition, we can start seeing and having an idea of a suitable business model. So on the left-hand side, we have the FA Cup, the most popular sport, but only a quarter of the fan base is willing to pay. For other sports like Formula One, almost half are willing to pay to watch, and they're more likely to end up in a subscription service. To make this more clear, we will turn this graph into a scatter plot. So on the horizontal axis, we'll have the popularity of the sport, and on the vertical axis, we'll have the percentage of each fan base of the competitions willing to pay to watch. If the willingness to pay is lower and it's towards the down end of the graph, they're more likely to be on free-to-air services. If the willingness to pay is high, they're more likely to be on subscription services. On the same basis, if a sport is very popular, it's more suitable for mass broadcast, but if it's less popular, it's probably more suitable for OTT TV or better suitable. Now, with that in mind, we divide this graph on these 4 sections, and on the right-hand side, we have the popular sports that can end up in pay TV and free-to-air TV, depending on the willingness to pay. And on the left-hand side, we have the sports that can end up on subscription OTT or free OTT, again, depending on the percentage of willingness to pay. If we start populating this graph, we can see where each sport sits within it. So on the right-hand side, we'll have very popular sports like the FA Cup and Champions League, and the difference between them are the percentage of of their fan base willing to pay. The FA Cup has less sponsors that are willing to pay, and it's more suitable for free-to-view. Also in the UK is a listed event, and that also affects the perception of the fan base for willingness to pay. But someone for Champions League, as popular as FA Cup, people are more willing to pay, and they have more power to negotiate high TV rights for pay TV platforms. On the left-hand side, we have similarly popular sports like the Women's Super League and Women's Champions League and the NBA and NFL. Again, the difference between them are the willingness to pay of the fan base. NFL and NBA have a fan base that almost half of them are willing to pay to watch, but the Women's Champions League and the Women's Super League are less than 30%. And we've seen that translated in the market with the launch of free services like the FA Player, who launched with the Women's Super League, and the UEFA TV, who launched with the Women's Champions League, alongside with other niche competitions like the Youth League and futsal. Now, the extremes of this graph will indicate the opportunity for subscription OTT services and free OTT services, but if we populate this graph with all the sports I've shown you earlier, we can see that most of them will fall somewhere in the middle. The extremes of the graph will indicate a clear opportunity, but in the middle, the competitions are more likely to be dependent on other market dynamics, such as which of them are listed events and have to be on free TV, what time and which day the competitions are on, and with what other competitions they're competing for viewership. If we take, for example, the NFL in the UK, NFL has its own direct-to-consumer service, but on the same time, they do have TV rights deals with pay TV, with Sky, and for Super Bowl with BBC. Now, the NFL in the UK has a small fan base, but what if we take the hypothetical that NFL keeps all its rights in the UK and has only the direct-to-consumer service and no other rights on pay TV? What this fan base could translate to in terms of revenues? We estimate that the NFL fans willing to pay to watch are around 1 million. If the NFL managed to sign up only 1/3 of these people, and we assume that they'll take the lower cost annual pack of £70 per year, that will leave the NFL generating around 19 million per year. And that for the UK, it's a pretty significant number in terms of revenues if we consider that it's similar and even higher than the TV rights deals other more popular sports than the NBA managed to secure, such as La Liga and Serie A, and they're higher in terms of total revenues that NFL is making from their own TV rights deals with Sky and BBC. So what are the main takeaways of today's presentation?
So although the Sport OTT audience is a small one, it's young, it has disposable income, and it could be absolutely instrumental to the growth of future fan bases. Secondly, although currently the economics of pure OTT players have got a large discrepancy between the revenue and the rights costs, this becomes even larger when the operating costs are factored in. So it's at this point that auxiliary funding from streams such as advertising could begin to play a big role.
And as we saw in terms of direct-to-consumer services, for Tier 1 sports, it's too much big of a risk right now to launch in their own domestic markets, but we can see clear opportunities and we can find these opportunities for more niche sports, second-tier sports, and out-of-market basis. Thank you very much, and we'll be answering questions right now if we have any. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you both. That was a really informative presentation. Thank you. There's one question on the screen here from Paul Farrell from Virgin Media. Paul asks, do you think the inflation in sports rights has reached its highest level and rights holders will have to be more flexible in how and who they partner with to maintain revenues?
I think domestically that could definitely be the case, especially for the likes of the Premier League. But as we've seen with their deal with Nenton Scandinavia recently, the international bubble has definitely not burst. But, you know, we've seen the likes of La Liga launch their own D2C services in markets where they don't think they're making enough from broadcast revenue. So they're already becoming slightly more flexible in how they're feeding those rights out. And I wouldn't be surprised if other rights holders follow suit as well.
Thank you. And another one that's just come in, Shah Beals, who is the past president of CTAM US. How accurate is willingness to pay in translating to subscriptions? Shah notices you sometimes assumed a third and other times a half.
Yes, so the way we ask our respondents, we funnel them through if they like sports in general, what kind of sports they're interested in watching, which competitions, and then if they're willing to pay. So because we're funneling them in this way, it's a pretty good representative of the percentage of people are willing to pay, but also because it's an internet survey, it's kind of overestimating. The total willingness to pay that you see, the reason that we take less than half, it's because we've run the survey through 20 countries now, and we have live examples of the people that are willing to pay and they actually subscribe to services like Sky Sports, DAZN, or other services. We've seen that from the total people that are willing to pay, half is almost the limit. And that's why we said that use up to half of the total willingness to pay usual competitions manage to capture. In the case of the NFL, we took 1/3 just to be sure that we are not overestimating, and also to show that 1/3, it will be still pretty good to capture a lot of revenues. Even with 1/4, still the revenues will be very good, but that's how the willingness to pay translates.
Got it, perfect. Thank you very much. If anybody else has any questions, if you would like to email either info@ctameurope.com, or you can email directly there, info@ampereanalysis.com. And if anyone wishes to either view the presentation again or listen to the recording, this will be uploaded onto the members only section of ctameurope.com. And don't forget, we have the webinars and podcasts throughout the year. Hopefully Ampere will do another one in 2020 for us. And we've got the symposium in London in April, where there'll be lots of networking opportunities there, of course, too. We'll keep you updated next week about the symposium. So thank you to you both for doing a great presentation. We do appreciate it. And thank you for everyone for attending. Thanks a lot. I wish you a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.